Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is that you are tuning in. This is Unapologetically Me, featuring me. No special guest, just me. Hey everybody, how are you guys doing today? I hope you had a great weekend. It's been a busy weekend. I went and visited some family. So a lot of people were asking where I have been, and this case has taken a lot out of me. I've put a lot into it mentally and emotionally, and that coupled with, being a mom, 4 kids, it's summer vacation, so they're home, and you know how it goes. All right, I'm doing the best I can to get things out as quickly as possible. So let's just get right into it. So this is part 2, and I wanted to start out by saying that ever since day 1, it has appeared to me personally, in my opinion, that Lancashire police and any of the higher ups involved have been much more concerned with silencing social media than they have been with this actual case. The funny thing about that is just take a look at any high profile case that social media has gotten a hold of. They've always gone crazy with rumors and speculation and wild theories. We can look at the Idaho 4 case. We can look at the Kylie Rodney case, which is another one that I find to be a complete shit show. We can look at the Gabby Petito case. We had Brian Laundrie. He's, being cited in all these areas, and people are putting out fake videos, and you never hear the police pay any mind to any of that, because to them that's not important. They stick to the facts. They don't sit and talk shit about TikTok and YouTube. But for some reason with the Nicola Bulley case, even though it's been no different than any other high profile case when it comes to the speculation and the rumors and the craziness, we have police, investigators, and even coroners talking about social media in every single article that goes out. Even in the inquest, they said, we're going to have all this extra security and blah, blah, blah. They had more of their own media there than there were anyone else. The police and investigators, they ignore social media. They're not going to pour gasoline on the fire. But in this case, for some reason, that seems to be their top priority. Antagonizing social media content creators into producing even more craziness. That's not what I am doing. I'm not producing any craziness. I am taking everything that they're telling us and I'm analyzing it. I'm questioning it. But I'm just going to let that go for now. So this is part 2. If you have not seen part 1, I'll put it up right here. You can look at the top right corner of your screen and you can just click on that. Go watch part 1 and then you can come back to part 2. In this video, we're going to be talking about the postmortem examination findings. In part 3, I want to go over the timeline because thanks to the inquest and new witness testimony, we have yet more issues with the timeline. And again, I want to remind everyone that I am using their evidence and their witness statements and their own words to back up my theory of a cover-up. And when I say cover-up, I want you to think about what that really means. Would police go through all of this to cover up a domestic situation? Many people want to point the finger at Paul. And whether or not there were DV issues within their relationship, that does not matter to me in regards to what happened to Nikki, because I believe that if DV were the only issue, this charade would never have gone up. That's my belief at this point in time. However, I told you I'm still looking into a lot of things, but I believe this is so much bigger. I always have. So just to put it out there, I don't believe that has anything to do with Nikki's death. I've said I found a lot of things we need to talk about, but first, I'd like to get on the same page with the evidence that was brought up at the inquest. I believe you need to understand how deceptive the police are being. I need you to understand how corrupt Lancashire is. It runs on organized crime, and it has for years. There are several other individuals that have gone missing and or have been found in bodies of water in Lancashire that nobody has an answer for. I've looked into those cases and they're all the same. It's like they took their own life, or it was drug related. Michael Brooks was allegedly tripping off shrooms, so they used that as a reason that he jumped in the river. Rachel Jackson had a history of mental illness, so they used that as the reason she was found dead in a park. Shannon Canning went missing on her way to work. She's alleged to have taken her own life. Reese Rogers, missing from a camping trip, found weeks later in the same area that he was last seen in, despite in-depth searches from several different search teams. And who can forget Derek Clayton, Peter Baglin? The list goes on and on. You need to think about that if you're questioning what I'm saying. Okay, let's get back to Nikki and this freak show of an inquest. In part 1, we talked about the difference between the coroner and the forensic pathologist. In this case, the forensic pathologist chosen was Dr. Allison Armour. It is my opinion that Dr. Allison was chosen for a reason, as she does not appear to be the most qualified in giving honest testimony, in my opinion. There were some other cases that she was put on where she legit ruined people's lives. And I will leave it up to you guys to go do a search on her yourselves. You may have already seen some comments in the comment section about her. And I'm not going to get into all of that because this is about Nicola, but she certainly has a track record that is not the best. According to Dr. Allison, the post-mortem exam found no signs that she had been assaulted or harmed. And just like everything else in this case, it stuck out to me because her findings don't necessarily line up with that statement. Their theory is that Nikki slipped and fell. And one would think that yes, you would have some injuries from falling. So I'm not too concerned with the fact that she found certain injuries. What I'm more concerned with is why it wasn't explained where these injuries could have come from. Throughout this entire investigation, there have been many things left to question, which is part of why there's so much speculation. When you question things that should have a simple answer and you're not getting those answers, it's really difficult not to speculate. And I believe this was all intended. They are enjoying social media, TikTok in particular, running wild with theories because they're trying to pass a law right now to have TikTok banned and to silence people on social media. So the more they talk smack about social media and content creators, the more they're riling up other people to stand behind them. Oh, we should ban TikTok and YouTube and Twitter, and we need to silence these conspiracy theorists. And I feel like lately, more than ever, I certainly have never once said that Nicola Bulley was abducted by aliens. I never put across a theory that didn't make sense with the evidence. I never asked a question that shouldn't have an answer. I don't have an ulterior motive here. I'm not trying to shut down TikTok or social media. I'm not getting paid hundreds or thousands of dollars to talk about Nicola. I'm simply asking questions, the same questions that thousands of other people are asking. Now, I don't want to start rambling, so let's get back to the autopsy. Something to keep in mind here is that all mainstream media outlets are reporting things a little bit differently. And it does make it hard to keep up with. They've also been known to put out misinformation, so again, it makes it difficult to get accurate information. But Dr. Allison said that the evidence of watery fluid in Nicola's lungs and stomach was what led her to conclude the cause of death was drowning. And she said, quote, "I conclude the cause of death is drowning. The lungs themselves showed classical features we see in drownings. In my opinion, Nicola Bulley was alive when she entered the water," unquote. My question immediately is, what did the lungs show that is a classical feature seen in drownings? Because here's the thing, just because a body is found submerged in water does not mean that drowning is the cause of death. In fact, it is very difficult to prove drowning as a cause of death. Dr. Allison told the court that Nicola's forehead was covered in mud and dirt was found in her body. Specifically, she said in her throat, both which are classical features in drowning cases. True. However, those are also classical features of a body found submerged in water. Water in the stomach, dirt in the throat, mouth, nose, or caked on the body. That's all just proof that she was in the water. It does not prove her cause of death. She also spoke about the toxicology and said that paracetamol and a prescription beta blocker propranolol were found in the body, but only at therapeutic levels. Now, the beta blocker, propranolol, will slow down the heart rate. So this drug is used for anxiety in Nicola's case, but it's also used for people with AFib or certain types of heart conditions where the heart tends to beat rapidly, often enough that it's a problem. So because this was found in her system, she was obviously taking it, which means that her heart rate would have been lower than most people's, and basically anything could have caused a spike in that heart rate. Not just falling in the water or a gasp of air. And we're going to get into the screams that were heard because to me, they sound more like she was surprised. Someone popped out on her, grabbed her. Maybe that's why she had bruises on her arms, but let's keep going. And we're going to talk about the Fitbit and the heart rate and the steps and all of that. So let's just get through this autopsy part first. So Dr. Allison also said that there was no bleeding in the brain or any natural disease, and this has all been reported differently depending on what article you're looking at, but she also said that there were bruises, but that the bruises did not contribute to her death. She also said that the internal examination found classic signs of asphyxia, which happens when the body is deprived of oxygen. But she went on to say that there was no sign of trauma to Nicola's neck. The court was also told, quote, flecks and fragments of dirt, unquote, were found inside Nicola's throat, and there was water in and around her lungs, which are typical features seen in drowning. Nicola also had several bruises on her body, including on her right arm. I've also seen comments about other injuries on her face. Some blood on her chin, a scratch on her nose, and head injuries. But I'm not sure what's true and what's not because I can't find any of that information that people are saying that she had more injuries than what I'm able to find. And I don't know if this is all hearsay, but if I can't find proof to actually show you what I'm telling you, then I don't really like to talk about it. So we're going to move on for now. But if any of you guys have articles that list off the other injuries besides just bruising or several bruises, could you please email that to me because I can't find it. Everything is just very nondescript when it comes to her injuries from what I can find. It's either a number of bruises, several bruises, some bruising, all followed up with, but none of it contributed to her death. I have yet to find an article about any marks on her face. So Professor Michael Tipton, a world expert in drowning, said that he agreed with Dr. Allison's findings. For some reason, freedom of information does not apply to this case, so I don't foresee them releasing anything to the public, no matter what the law says we're entitled to know. So that's the problem as far as getting any accuracy, though anything could be doctored at this point. It has also been confirmed that Nicola had not been drinking before her death, as she had no alcohol in her bloodstream. The toxicology results found very low levels of alcohol in her body, but that is consistent with microbiological postmortem activity. And for anyone who doesn't know, after you pass away, your body does produce a type of ethanol. That again is another fact, and you can fact check that on your own. The court was then shown images of the river, and we talked about that in the last video where I went all into Matthew Thackeray's video. So again, if you haven't seen part 1, that's all in part 1. So Dr. Allison went on to say that the bruises were discovered on her lower limbs, including the front of her shin and right knee. There were no signs of asphyxiation, as we said, or hemorrhage. And when asked if there was any sign of trauma to the neck, she replied none whatsoever. And that's a bit interesting. Like, why are they so concerned with her neck and asphyxiation? Because it's almost as if someone was suggesting that she may have been strangled. And I'm glad to hear that there was no sign of that. However, there are several different ways that a person could inflict drowning on another person. And not to be graphic here, but grabbing them by the back of the head, especially a female who has a full head of hair, and just pushing their head in the water would be enough. So, in my opinion, as I've said, I don't believe that just because she drowned, it means she drowned on her own. Dr. Allison told the court, quote, Miss Bulley was alive when she entered the water because it is an active process to swallow and inhale water into the lungs. The coroner then asked if there was any evidence of third-party involvement in Miss Bulley's death, to which Dr. Allison said, in her opinion, quote, there was not, unquote. But then there's also been articles printed that she had bruising on her arm. So bruises on her knee and shin do point to a fall, but I would also expect there to be some injury to the hands had she fallen. I don't know. I'm not an expert. As I've said multiple times, it's just an observation. So Dr. Allison told the court, quote, I gave the cause of death as drowning. The watery fluid identified within the stomach and also in the lungs themselves are classical features as we see in cases of drowning, unquote. Watery fluid. Okay, well, this is what I found about diagnosing a victim of drowning. First of all, diagnosing drowning is not an easy task for a pathologist. There are a few things that many drowning victims exhibit that can help with this diagnosis. And the first one would be lung distension, where nonspecific lesions, such as with emphysema, are noted. A pink froth around the mouth and nose is also commonly seen in victims of drowning. Another way is with a diatom test, which looks for important biological markers in the organs. And the way they test would be to get samples from the cardiac blood, lungs, liver, kidney tissue, bone marrow, and brain. And these things would be collected first thing during the autopsy. Unfortunately, I do have to tell you that the diatom test is a much debated test due to cross-contamination probabilities. It is always difficult to rule out possible contamination, and therefore a negative diatom test cannot rule out drowning. That being said, there are still other things looked at. Another one would be species recovered from the body corresponding to those from the site where the body was said to have drowned or been discovered. So that dirt in her throat and the watery fluid would be compared to the dirt and water in the area she was discovered, in addition to the area where she was said to have drowned, along with any type of insects. In short, to diagnose drowning, pathologists put together a number of things in order to come to that conclusion, such as the police investigation, the forensic autopsy, microscopic analysis, and biochemical testing, none of which was mentioned by Dr. Allison. And all of that being said, I feel like the forensic pathologist, Dr. Allison, would have given a bit more during this inquest to keep anyone from questioning whether or not these other tests were actually run. Because simply put, water in the stomach does not mean drowning. And finding somebody in the water does not mean they drowned. All it means is that they were found submerged in water. Many bodies are dumped in water, and they will have dirt, they will have water in their bodies. It's up to the forensic pathologist to be certain whether or not somebody has drowned when giving that as the cause of death. And I don't feel that Dr. Allison gave enough for me to believe that she is certain or that she can be certain. Of course, that's just my opinion. If it were my loved one, I would want to know if all of those other tests were run. The family has a right to the autopsy results, so hopefully those tests were run and they can be sure that she did in fact drown. That being said, however, it still doesn't mean she drowned on her own, and we can get into that. We will get into that later on. Let's just get through this inquest. So the coroner found the manner of death to be accidental, and the pathologist determined the cause of death to be drowning. Put it together, Nicola Bulley died from accidental drowning. But it's my opinion that they still wanted to label this death as a suicide because they speak incessantly about Nicola's mental health, and they bring up all sorts of words such as she was struggling, she was not suicidal. Then the media printed an article about the family lawyer asking the coroner to rule it as accidental, as if they feared that there was so much evidence pointing to her taking her own life that it would have been considered a suicide. I believe the police really wanted to conclude suicide. I believe it was easier for them. I believe that they felt they had more evidence to back that up rather than accident. But the very least that they could do for the family was to give them the verdict of accidental death, because they knew it wasn't a suicide. But they also couldn't say that there was any third-party involvement. Again, my opinion. I believe that this satisfied the family. It was the best outcome that they were going to get, and that's what makes this so unfortunate. Now let's talk about the scream that was heard by a few people, and what my opinion is on that. The family specifically spoke out at the inquest about these screams that were allegedly heard. In short, they felt that the screams had no relevance to Nikki's death. The Bulley family asked in their closing statement for coroner Dr. James Adley to dismiss evidence from the two eyewitnesses who told the court that they heard screams near a graveyard at around the time Miss Bulley went missing. Their legal team said, their legal team being Miss Sophie Cartwright, KC, who is also in very close cahoots with Dr. James Adley when it comes to this case especially, quote, "The family submission to you is plainly the timing and location of those screams in conjunction with other evidence. You can dismiss those screams as irrelevant and would like you to make a finding of fact that those screams do not have relevance to her death," unquote. Now, I find it completely absurd the amount of things that are said to have no relevance when it comes to this case. Every single piece of evidence that points to possible third-party involvement has been considered irrelevant. And this blows my mind. I've said a few times in a few different videos that maybe this is just the way the UK handles things. The gaslighting within this case is phenomenal. They are literally showing us and presenting evidence of third-party involvement while at the same time also telling us that there's no possibility of third-party involvement and it's all irrelevant. They are telling us that they know this for a fact, but they're also telling us that they never investigated it as anything other than an accident or her taking her own life. That is gaslighting at its finest. Let me ask you something. Do you feel crazy when it comes to this case? If you do, you've been gaslit. Are you questioning everything that you have heard and seen when it comes to this case? If so, you've been gaslit. Your very own perception is being manipulated. Okay, so let's just move on. So the scream. The first person that mentioned a scream was Helen O'Neill. Helen O'Neill, whose garden backs onto allotment lane, said it was, quote, quick, a high to low pitch, and over in seconds. It was not alarming, unquote. And she said this was because she's used to hearing sounds of children playing in the nearby school, although not usually at that time. What time? What time was the scream heard? Give me exact or approximate. I don't care. What time? She said, quote, "I pictured two female teenagers messing around on the river path, and there were no other sounds. So I didn't think anything of it until later that night after speaking to Nikki's dad and sister," unquote. She told the inquest, quote, "I heard a scream. It's not an alarming noise. It was just over in a couple of seconds. I'm quite used to hearing the children in the school out back, but it was not that noise." She went on to say, "I vividly remember thinking it's unusual at this time. In my head, I had two females walking along by the river and one jumped out on the other. I didn't think anything of it until later on. There were no other sounds for me to be concerned about," unquote. Okay, yet she was concerned. After speaking with Nikki's family, she just said so. Once she found out that Nikki had gone missing, she instantly remembered that scream. So it did concern her in hindsight. And I'm not trying to put words in her mouth. This is just my understanding of what she said. She remembered hearing the scream. She wasn't concerned about it at the time, though it was unusual to hear screams at that time, but she blew it off. She then finds out Nikki's missing, talks to the family, and she realized, hey, that could have been Nikki. And I think it's important that I bring that up, that I heard a scream that morning during the time Nikki would have been in that location. Contradicting statements. Classic manipulation. All right. Then we heard from Veronica Cleason, another mother, who also talked about Nikki looking normal, yet at the same time saying, quote, "She didn't look anything. She looked vacant, but that wasn't unusual," Veronica went on to say, quote, she had no emotions, no sadness or happiness, but that was normal for Nikki. But we heard Claire Chesham say that Nikki was smiling. So I don't know. Now, Veronica said she heard this scream after attending a meeting at the tennis club. And that she heard the scream while getting into her car. She said, quote, I was just about to get into the car and I heard a scream, a very short scream, and my immediate thought was somebody's having a bit of fun at the back of the graveyard. She said it was an inhale scream, like a sharp intake of breath, unquote. She mentioned that initially she thought that it was some kids playing around in the back of the graveyard. So that must be the location where Veronica felt she heard the scream come from. So where is the graveyard? Well, it surrounds the parish church of St. Michael's on Wire, much closer to Blackpool Lane or Garstang Road, whichever you want to call it, because we've already talked about this in the village. It is considered Blackpool Lane once you get to the bridge. But anyway, so the bench area and the cemetery are a fair distance away from each other. And Veronica said she heard this scream while coming out of the tennis club. So I just took a couple of screenshots here to show the distance between the cemetery and the bench area where allegedly the scream of cold water shock would have taken place. Also from the tennis club to the bench as well. The thing is, the cemetery and allotment lane are much closer together than the cemetery and the bench. And Helen heard the scream from in her backyard off of allotment lane, while Veronica heard the scream and thought it came from the back of the cemetery. And I made note of that because she specifically said the back of the cemetery, as in the furthest away from the road and the closest to the bench. But it's much closer to allotment lane where Helen said she heard the scream, and also where Richard Fife said the man in black was said to have been standing. To be completely frank with you, I don't see how Veronica could have even heard the type of scream that she described, which would have been a short gasp of surprise that allegedly took place at the bench near the lower field. I'm obviously not clear on the time that either of these two women heard this scream. Was it two separate screams? We don't even know. And I'm not surprised by that. Neither one of these witnesses gave a time. From what we're able to know, it's not been printed. I don't know if they actually said the time in the inquest, but as I said, it's not been printed. And no doubt, if they didn't offer that information up, it most certainly wouldn't have been asked or questioned by the family attorney, Sophie Cartwright KC, as it should have been. Because family attorney, Sophie Cartwright KC, never questioned anything she was there to question. As I said in part 1, nobody who was at that inquest was there for Nikki, not even her own family's attorney. The scream was described as an element of surprise. Could it have been from cold water shock? Well, in my opinion, not if she was inhaling water at the exact same time, which is what is alleged to have happened. I personally would have questioned a surprise scream in the same location of a strange man being sighted near an area where a woman went missing before jumping to the conclusion of anything else. But again, I'm not the expert. So what do you think? Was there even a scream? Was there even a man in black? Was there even an autopsy? I'm going to end part 2 now because I do want to put this out in pieces so that nothing is missed. I have found when I put too much into a video, things are missed. Important things. I've been asked if I'm going to give my theory of what happened. And yes, I am going to give my opinion and my theory of what happened, but it's going to be a little bit before I do that because there's still a lot more information I want to go over. We have this inquest, and then I want to start showing you some things that point to motive. We need 3 things to prove foul play, right? We need means, motive, and opportunity. So once I'm done going over the evidence that was given to us at the inquest, I will then go into what we have been finding that would give motive for Nicola to be abducted and murdered, because that is what I believe happened. So I said in part 3, we're going to go over the timeline. We're going to go over the timeline, and then we're going to go over the Fitbit. Maybe I should flip-flop it around. Maybe we'll do the Fitbit next, and then the timeline. Or maybe I'll just put it all together. I don't know. I don't want to miss anything. Okay, anyway. I'll talk to you guys on the next one. Have a great week. Have a great day. This is being put out in parts. There is more to come. I get so many comments of, are you going to elaborate? Or this was too short, or you didn't talk about everything. I'm putting it out in parts. You know, it says that in the thumbnail and in the title of the video. I don't know how else to get it across. There's a lot left and I'm not done yet. Please be safe, be happy, be healthy, and most of all, be unapologetically you. Bye-bye.